Hi everyone, welcome again in a new video of Ignite. In the previous videos, we have seen how we can define the Ignite configuration and then set different properties with it. Start the Ignite server by applying a start method on ignition. But if we are working with a Spring Boot, we can leverage the auto configuration property of Spring Boot. Right now, we have this Spring Boot based application, and if I just run this application, the application has been started and the Tomcat server is running. At this moment, we don't have anything related to Ignite, and whatever Ignite configuration we have added here in the Ignite server, we can use this configuration with our application. If we need this thing to be automatically configured, we need to add one library, which is Ignite Spring Boot Auto Configure ext. And now if I just enable this library and rerun our server, apart from the Tomcat, it has also started a node. And here you can see we have Ignite related stuff and it has the topology. Within that, it has instantiated one server and it has lots of default configuration added automatically. And if you want to see where it is coming from, it has the IgniteAutoConfiguration.java. Spring uses this class to configure the Ignite. IgniteAutoConfiguration is annotated with the configuration. So whenever the Spring Boot based application will start, it will automatically inject the beans. In that process, it will start with the Ignite configuration and it instantiate the Ignite configuration. And then if we have defined some of the properties in the property file under the Ignite, then it will merge those properties. After the Ignite configuration, inject that configuration with the Ignite and it starts the server by applying the same configuration. By default, if you look at the Ignite configuration, so here we have lots of default properties. This Ignite configuration reads all the properties from the Ignite configuration. If we have got some, then it will pick from there. Otherwise, it will use the default values. Here, if you look, we have this Ignite configuration, whereas we have a couple of properties such as Ignite instance name, and then we have Ignite home and other properties. We can set all of these properties in our application file. And in the auto configuration, we have the Ignite props prefix. So we have to set all the properties within the Ignite. And here we can set the Ignite configuration object. Let's go to the application file. Here we can just use Ignite and we can set the different properties such as instance name. So we have Ignite instance 1, and similarly we can provide the consistent ID of the node, and here we have consistent ID. And let's rerun this application. Now if you look, we have this Ignite configuration and the property is Ignite instance 1 for the Ignite instance name, similarly consistent ID. So here we have the ID node 1. Similarly, we can set the other properties as well. Instead of the application YAML file, if we want to configure programmatically, then we can just use the Ignite auto configuration. Here you can see we have the conditional on missing bean. That means if we have the Ignite configuration instance, then it will pick that particular instance. Otherwise, it will create the bean out of the default configuration that is being given in this Ignite auto configuration file. So we just need to create a Ignite configuration bean, and that is what we can do within our configuration. Here we have a class Ignite config where we have used the configuration. And now we can define the bean which returns the Ignite configuration. For that, we can simply create a new instance of Ignite configuration and we can return from here. At this moment, if we just rerun the application, now it has created a Ignite configuration instance, but this time the property that we have set within our application file are missing. That means whatever configuration we will add here, this will be the configuration that will be added with the start method of the Ignite. So here the configuration will be picked up from the instance that we have created. And here we have this configuration properties, and if we just use these properties within the configuration, now let's run it again. This time it has picked up the properties from the application file as well. So here we can set the properties like set instance name, and similarly let's add one more property, Ignite configuration dot set consistent ID. And in the application file I'll just remove one of the property, and let's rerun this. Okay. So here in the Ignite configuration that we have, Ignite instance name is Ignite instance 1, which is coming from the property file. And then if we just look for the consistent ID, this is consistent ID, which is coming from the configuration that we have provided. Application file will override the configuration that we have defined over here. Now similarly, you can also use the Ignite configurer. Whatever configuration we are creating, before that it will make use of this Ignite configurer. So here let's copy this thing within our application. If we just use this bean, and here let's add some of the configuration like configuration dot set consistent ID. Here I have defined this Ignite configurer and provided the consistent ID as consistent ID 1. When we have this Ignite configuration, while getting the instance of this Ignite configuration bean, we are not using this Ignite configurer at all. So there is no use of this particular property. But if you just comment down this thing and restart the server, so here we have got the consistent ID as 1, which is coming from the Ignite configurer. So here in the Ignite auto configuration, default implementation of Ignite configuration takes the Ignite configurer as the parameter. So before this method Ignite configurer will be called, and if we have any implementation for that, in the configuration we will get the properties, and those properties will be used here with the Ignite configuration. So it will merge both the properties and also take the properties from the configuration file, and combination of all these properties will be the configuration for our Ignite server. This is the basic configuration that we have done. If we need to add more complex configuration in our application YAML file, that is what we can do. And all of the things which we can do within the Ignite configuration like this, so all of these properties we can set within our application file. In the earlier videos, we have seen if we need to add the persistency, then we need a data storage configuration, and this configuration we need to add within our Ignite configuration. Same thing we can achieve by applying this configuration within our application.yaml file. Here we have this data storage configuration, and this is what we can define over here. And within this, we can define the default data region, and within this configuration we can add another property which is the persistence enabled, and we want to enable the persistence, so it is true. With this configuration, let's rerun the server again. With this persistence enabled, we have got the cluster state as inactive. This is what we have learned in our earlier video. With the persistent mode, we have to specifically set the cluster mode as active. We have defined this cluster state within the cluster. That is what we are getting from the Ignite instance. But in our configuration right now, we don't have any instance of Ignite. Like here, we have got the Ignite configurer and Ignite configuration. Ignite instance will be created by this Ignite auto configuration only. So we cannot create this instance by ourselves. Here this Ignite is a bean, so we can get this from the application context. To get the context, we can use the Spring Boot applications. Here, this is our context. So here we can get bean Ignite instance that we need. Let's cast it to Ignite, and from Ignite we can get the cluster, and then we can set the state as active. If we run this, Ignite cluster is in active state, and let's go down. Here it has started making this new state as active. Our cluster is in active state. Here we can also add the cache configuration. In the Ignite configuration, it is an array. Here we can define lots of configuration. So for the configuration, we can provide the name my cache. So with this configuration, it has created a cache in the default data region. Any of the property that we can set within the Ignite configuration, we can set it via the application file, or we can set it within the Ignite configurer. This is it from this video. In the next video, we will see other features of Ignite. Till then, happy coding!